Hello, hello. Pardon me, guys. I hate to have you guys on, but on the screen like that. But I was watching this video, EOCNF Rocky Mountains with Rob Thomas and Daryl Cone. Pardon me. So I thought I would pass along my thoughts of this as we go. So maybe I can just go to here. So there's two kinds of orogenies, two orogenies in the Rockies. Sevier orogeny that have been decoupled because that's how plate tectonics works. It's easier if we decouple things and force everyone to keep it decoupled rather than allowing people to have more interesting theories that actually merge the things into one theory. So it's easy to make it appear to make sense by just having a single decoupled aspect and then another decoupled aspect, and explaining them separately without really trying to explain them all simultaneously. So that's what seems to be happening here. There is apparently, from what I was gleaning from this video, especially this guy, Rob Thomas, who's from Montana, is that they're one orogeny. They're, and I'll go into why he says that, but they're one orogeny, where meaning they form together, and they're just different styles of the same orogeny, and so where basically these mountains, the Sevier orogeny, have a style where there's like a thrust of a there's a layer and then another layer that gets thrust on top, and then that has just like sheared layers on top that just keep like thrusting on top, I guess, or maybe vice versa, where it's like one at a time. I'm not sure. I was thinking just a stack of them go, and then the stack kind of gets sheared. But he said like a deck of cards kind of idea, which makes sense, where like some of the cards slide off. Okay, and then here though, the laramide orogeny is not like that. It's instead like a spike upward, so the basement is at the bottom here, but the basement is spiked up here at the laramide orogeny, with the mountains produced by the basement elevation increase by the basement moving up. So there's those two orogenies where seemingly the basement over here, like some kind of pressure over this way, is then causing, beyond a certain point, it's causing like a vibration up down, leading to mountains in this kind of orogeny. Okay, so let's just move on though. Not still building is one of the first things he said. The Rockies are not still building. There are structures and locations such as the Tetons, which are in the region of the Rockies, which are still building, but it's not considered to be a classic part of, or a part of the classic Rockies, the Tetons. So there's some kind of distinguishing difference between the Tetons and the rest of the Rockies. The Laramide orogeny is further east, vertical relatively. Sevier is further west, horizontal relatively. And then he presented the two options, if you will: flat slab subduction. Really, it's just as simple as it sounds. A slab of material subducts the end. It causes like the subducted slab to essentially produce material in the heat that boils up practically, and mountains arise above the slabs material. For that, but then the end load collision is just instead that in this instance, they're saying the insular terrain. So this goes into Baja, BC. This region, the insular terrain, I guess specifically Rangelia, maybe Alexander terrains, are part of the insular. I'm not sure. There must be some specific, maybe Vancouver Island. It's definitely got Rangelia in there. I'm just not sure why they have so many different names like that. Okay, so according to Rob Thomas, he was saying they should be termed styles and not orogenies because all are one event in a collisional fashion. That's pretty much that. The idea, I guess, is that a part of Baja, BC, this region comes up and applies a physical force. Maybe it comes up this way as part of the, at least like, that's why I'm a little confused by that it's just the outer one and they're not saying any of the other terrains are involved. It's really just the like one that came from way south that's being most considered to be involved, I guess. But apparently it pushed it this way, and that led to the deck of cards type of sliding off of material in this region, I guess. It's kind of how I interpreted what he was saying. To the west of it, slid over into the Rockies. And then as it slid, this is the crazy stuff. Western layers collided, and top layers slid eastward. So over around somewhere here, there's a collision, and top layers slid eastward. As the sheets propagated, they collided with boundaries and folded up until they got on top and continued to propagate. So basically, they'd collide with a boundary and just fold until they got a high enough folding to like go over top of it energetically, and then they continued to propagate. And then these are called thrust faults. Sandy Hollow thrust, for example, where basement rock is visible also for reasons that I'll get into. As slabs move eastward, they cause basement rocks to rise upward from below. So this is what part of the process is. This as these slabs are moving eastward. This is what geologists, especially, I'm not sure how extensive within geology this interpretation is, but for sure this dude knows what he's talking about. Right here, this dude knows what he's talking about. Let's see if we can find it. Like, he's probably in this region talking about it. I don't want to specifically try to find it because it's too much. Okay. But essentially, the slabs move eastward. There's in Montana. He's studying Montana, so the slabs move eastward. Of these thrust fault slabs, and then they run into resistance of these plutons that they physically cause to upwell. It makes me think of basically a current flowing along a surface, causing like a magnetic attraction almost up to the up or to the current, or like an electron moving in a subtle current. All the pictures. I don't see anything. I'm sure, like, I kind of like this, kind of this nature where there's a motion down a conduit path, which is pretty much on the surface, and then below it, energy is caused to move in ways and around it that lead to plutons rising from the depths and then physically bubbling up practically above the moving thrust fault. I don't know how true this is in terms of if this is how I will, like, if I really looked into it, if that's how I would feel. If I really looked into it, I'm not sure that I would feel that the plutons were moving up this way, but the way he described it sounded like that's what, like, evidence really strongly corroborates. I'm not sure what basis, but it sounded feasible in some ways, so let's keep going. As the slabs moved eastward, they caused basement rocks to rise upward from below, and then they hit the basement rocks, where they were caused to crumple as they like flow into the basement rock. They crumple around it, and then they physically deflect back, and then are caused to fold and propagate back eastward because they hit a more homogeneous rock and couldn't propagate through it. So it's like they hit a node. It makes me think of the gold foil experiment, where like the current is flowing past, generally speaking, like through the region, but then there's plutons. So like sometimes the current hits the pluton and deflects back. Just like that, pretty much. Both Sevier and Laramide orogeny styles, therefore, which are visible here, overlapped in time and space because they have the thrust faults of the motions eastward, and then they have these plutons with the presumably with the thrust faults like interacting with them also, and creating this like encasing of this flowing current. I mean, to me, so let's think about this for a second. There is a sheet moving eastward that is physically pushing on top of the layer, causing plutons to rise. In what world is that happening across millions of years? Not this one, because that's not how it happened. How this was like thrust faulted on was because the Earth was exploding over here, right about here, from the Earth expansion process leading to an exploding system, basically, that put gold deposits throughout the Pacific and all sorts of things, but also basically shoved material into this region heavily, especially causing like things of that nature. Apparently, like physical currents of layers atop the layers across large swaths of land to produce terrain that's mountainous. It seems, at least in part of the process, not to like act like that's the totality of what happened, of course, but okay. Folds have many sills, so here's really interesting. The folds themselves, as this layer moves across and folds, it basically cracks form, and then the pushing, like the reason it's moving is it's getting pushed by a more fluid material like a magma. So like the pushing magma where it folds is able to like come out, and it does so as what's called sills, like this. Just as like a structure, a vein kind of thing. That's a large scale, so depending on the scales and shapes, they're called different things, I think, and maybe the materials. But generally speaking, like they're just fed by some inlet. But in this case, it's a fracture in the plane of the crust that was overlaying the previously existing crust, flowing across it. Sorry if that's loud, guys. So these sills, though, wow, because we can't like date when the rocks moved by dating the rocks themselves. What the sills do is they offer a place to be like, okay, that sill is in the rock. It's before, I think it's before it folded. At places they find sills that are folded also, and those sills they can date and be like, okay, this sill reliably dates to 72 million years. So this all occurred post 72 million years, is what they were suggesting. The formation of the Rockies, like uplifting post 72 million based on the sills, which really is approaching that 65 million that the supernova is, where it's just like energy is just shoved into this region. Igneous rocks intruded into structures, which are the sills, into the folds that ran up it like a ramp. So these sills ran up it like a ramp and bulged out at the top, almost like a laccolith. Where the folds are intruded, sent off sills where they are folded. Yeah, where they are folded, it gives timing on folding. 72 million year old sills folded after likely, and then he says likely nearer to 72 million with a lower end at 46 million because of a certain mountain called Black Mountain that was formed at, like, they are well established to be 46 million and was formed on top. Let's check out Black Mountain. Oh, okay. So there's Black Mountain that he mentions, apparently. I don't know. Maybe that's Black Mountain. Not sure why. I mean, it went right to Montana. Okay, Okay, so stitching plutons within Sizer 80 some wait, early 70s. I'm not sure. I guess there's plutons within this region that began around 80 something and are in the range of 80 something to 70, early 70s. That's what it is. That's what he said. He didn't give a specific range, but I wanted to write it down because it was relevant to things. But essentially, the plutons in Montana are at similar ages to the plutons in Baja, BC. Line of reasoning. 80 something to early 70s is typically found for the plutons, he said. Also, he mentioned that there's shales in the region that are greasy. So it's kind of like the clays under Hawaii allow for landslides. The shales in this region allow for sliding of the slabs across the. So pretty much like it ran into resistance, but pressure's behind it, and it basically keeps pushing. But then there's this layering, and within that layering is a shale layer that just makes it more easily able to slide off the rest of the layering. That's what I'm thinking. Something of that nature tends to happen where shales are likely almost like greasing, allowing for the age or the motion of the propagation of the sheets. There's intrusions in central Montana of things such as cyanite, I believe. I believe he said cyanite. I'm not sure if he said it in relationship to the region, which is nepheline cyanide is in Girnar. So I'm just like taking note of the cyanide. Then there's dacites and andesites, he said, which require a high pressure melting. I'm not sure if those require high pressure melting. I just wrote high pressure melting necessary. But I'm not sure if those specifically required it. Okay, so I got two little points to make, and then I'm going to end this video. It occurred to me that, like, as the Earth expands, there's chakras that stay connected to each other. I've been talking about, but it didn't. I was like, what's going on with these things? Why are they staying connected? And it occurred to me that maybe they're like magnetically interacting, and that's when it clicked. I'm like, wait a minute. These particles here are not just like kind of hanging out, conjoined, like they're bonded through like magnetic bonds of currents that maybe aren't even like currents on the same scale where it's a magnetic field anymore, but more so just currents that flow, and like the current between on this particle and the current around this particle is one current. So even though it's two particles, there's one current around them both, generally speaking, that then basically produces a resistance to breakage because it gets pulled apart, but there's like one current, even though it's two systems, one current. So in effect, it basically produces bonds of different strengths that at points where there's like nodes. So I really think there's like nodes that are physically, like magnetically, boop, attached so that like the structure stays like in place, held in place across like buttons that are just like magnetic buttons of different strengths, so they can break with enough activation energy to break the current, pull the currents apart. But that's what I'm thinking is like there's certain nodes that are also like a solar flare, maybe. Certainly, some of the images of of the sun are reminiscent of how there's like two sides, and then the bond breaks like in the middle of this energy. I think it almost needs video to really see. Let's see, I don't want to just move on. Sun video. Also, don't want to get copyright stricken for no reason. I don't actually, like, that's the thing. Like, people are like, you're using my material. I don't give a shit, dude. Literally, like, no reason just to share information. You know what education is? Obviously not. I'm a little afraid, but anyway. Generally speaking, maybe like there's like a bond here, bond that just broke. Or is like decaying through different breakage processes. Where like the atoms involved decay. Like the singular atom. The singular large systems, the largest systems involved. Not just atoms, and there's like fractal state, but the largest atoms in the truth state of that region where there's like bonds between them. Okay, last thing that I wanted to mention. I don't know, so I've been talking about the sliding off of the Pacific plate from North America, this region, where the dragon was physically formed adjacent to Laurentia, and the Pacific plate was generally here, and it slid out over here. And there's all these seamounts, and there's all this overlayer, right? So imagine there's these two layers, and one of them gets shoved out, just shoved out from underneath, like this. Like this though, it's resting on it and it gets shoved out. And then suddenly it passes the boundary of the thing that it was on top of it, which is North America. And so what would happen if North America was resting its weight atop this layer as this layer slides out? Would it produce heavily mountainous peaks? Or would it like smoothen them down to like a flat surface nub type of thing? You know what I'm saying? So I had that thought. Like this. Like, why is it so flat? They're all so flat. That. These. This. They're flattened. And people maybe will interpret it as just simply flattened by erosion. But it's very flat. So I looked, it's called a goyet. This structure, also known as table mounts, is an isolated underwater so-called volcanic mountain with a flat top more than 200 meters below the surface of the sea. The diameter of these flat summits can exceed 10 kilometers, most commonly found in the Pacific Ocean, have been identified in all oceans except the Arctic Ocean, so that's kind of interesting. That almost goes against what I just said, because what I was saying it seems like it would mostly be from the Pacific, but like the same sliding out of the undercrust can happen anywhere, I guess. It doesn't have to be in the Pacific where that chunk slid out. Like over here, like I know there's some here. Like this could have slid out from under it too, to a degree. I'm not sure. Let's check it out on this map. In this region. Leading up to this, like this right here, this section could be slid out. I could see that happening in some small segment, just it's like detached enough to get shoved out. Even it has a boundary all the way down here. So because there's a boundary here, it basically is strongly suggestive that there's like potential at least of a motion away this way enough to create those. The Goyet. Let's see where else we find some Goyets. That looks like some Goyets. At least that one. Which maybe was under Morocco, Algeria, in this region. I don't know. And but in essence, that's a new thought I had about the Goyets that I'm sure no one else has really searched or looked into. It seems like maybe not the case if they're prominent in the wrong places. Like if they're formed like this is a little odd. These ones. Because I'm not sure that even this, I guess this could have slid out from under too. Like initially, it's possible it all slid out from under, and it formed under, slid out, got smoothened by the weight and compaction of the overcross, and that's just how they formed. Any Goyets. I mean, to me that seems most likely. So I'm gonna investigate it. I don't have like the data to confirm it yet, but almost assuredly. Maybe this even happened here. Like underneath continental crust here before motion away happened. Because it really kicks off around 182, 100 to 65, somewhere in that range. It's hard to say exactly. And this starts at 82 down to, I believe, 47. Let's see if they say bend. Bend. Okay, oldest, most heavily 39. So the bend occurred at 39. Thereabouts. This is Wikipedia, so of course it's not so rigid. I know people are like, let's see. Let's see if near the southern end of this. North of. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Yes, hello. That's not real. That's really not a Goyim. That's some bullshit right there. That's not flat top. It's just generally flat. It's not the same. Not the same as something like this. This, especially ones like that. Not the same. Not the same. Maybe it's Goyim. Freaking. Speaking of Goyim, feel free to learn about that subject. Be like, oh. Yeah, that's inappropriate, dudes. That's inappropriate as fuck. Okay, so that's what I got. See y'all soon. Peace.